Hello there everybody and welcome to my review of The Light Brigade for PlayStation VR 2. TLDR, it's one of my favorite VR games of the year. It's great. I found it extremely difficult to put down and I don't think I've played any other VR game more than this one. It's wonderful on PSVR 2 and I recommend it more than the Quest 2 version because it has better controls, better draw distance and comfort for playing in longer sessions. Considering the affordable price, it has a lot of value with all of the hours you'll get out of this, so I highly recommend it. And now, here's my full review. I've been reviewing a lot of VR games lately, and I've noticed that roguelikes are a big genre that are being made in VR recently, that and a lot of multiplayer games, surprisingly. I've played a bunch of them, with some being better than others, of course, but when I purchased my PlayStation VR 2, I was looking to build up my library and find some good games to play. Through sheer word of mouth, I heard about the Light Brigade and was told that it was very good and pretty affordable too. So I spent the $20 to $25 or so, I forget how much it actually cost, I think $25. So I spent that amount and went into it knowing damn near nothing other than the trailers that you can see on Steam. And before I knew it, I took my headset off and it was nighttime because of how long I was playing it. I got super hooked, and I've put around 30 hours on it and beaten it so many times that I've reached the highest difficulty level possible. Every time I feel like I might start getting tired of the game, I start a new run and end up playing the whole thing again. It's like I'm addicted or something. I just can't stop playing this game. It's so much fun, but what's so special about it? Let's just get to talking about its ups and downs so you better understand what this game's all about. To put it in simple terms, it's a roguelike shooter, so basically go through a bunch of levels, shooting people, beat a couple of bosses, and that's it. Game over. Go back to the start and do it all over again. It sounds like literally any other video game in the world, so how does this one stick out from the rest? Well, for one, the atmosphere is pretty great. It's dark and gloomy with a very light story. You're basically a small group of people that want to bring light into this world that has been overrun by darkness and dark purple crystals pretty much completely. The little church that acts as your main hub area is essentially the only place that's safe anymore. And as soon as you head out to try and set things right, all the different environments feel very cold and abandoned. Graphically, it's very simple and not that impressive, but it doesn't have to be in order to convey that oppressive feeling that you're being hunted down by a ton of enemies, and you're the only person that can take them down the vast majority of the time. I say vast majority because there will be some occasions where an AI partner will show up and help you, but for the most part, you're on your own. And that adds to the almost Rambo-like feeling where you're the only guy versus a ton of other guys, and you need to use all of your tools at your disposal to get out of this alive. But fair warning, you're going to die pretty frequently at the start, and you'll get sent back to the hub to try again. Speaking of which, you can use this hub area to gear up, you can upgrade your stuff, and choose what class you want to be. Initially, there's only one class, but as you level them up to a certain amount, you will keep unlocking more, which offers different guns, different magic spells, and perks for you to play with. I think one of the biggest reasons I ended up playing this game so many times is because of these classes, and how different your experience can be with each one. Every time you level them up, you get points that you can use to upgrade these classes. So it just gives you more incentive to use all the classes multiple times so that all of them get upgraded and then going out into the field to try them out. The guns, by the way, feel awesome to use. It's difficult to make a good shooter if it doesn't feel good to actually shoot, but you don't have to worry about that here. The game advertises a more realistic, physics-based kind of shooting with recoil and weight to the guns. If you grab them with one hand, you'll notice they're all wobbly and they'll feel weird to handle, but you get used to it fairly quickly, especially when you find a good, comfortable way to hold the gun with both hands. Two-handed weapons is definitely the most fun I've had, as opposed to pistols, where in my experience were completely useless. Either that, or I was a terrible shot with them. Probably the latter is more true than the other thing. I think the angle that I held my hand on while pointing the gun was a little off in VR than what I was actually doing in real life. Thankfully, there are options that you can play around with that can adjust for that, but I could never really find that sweet spot that just let me aim quickly and accurately, so I kinda just gave up on pistols and the pistolier class in favor of all the other classes that just had regular two-handed weapons. But whether you're using one hand or both, you'll still reap the benefits of playing this in PlayStation VR 2 through the haptic feedback on the motion controllers. There's a very subtle amount of resistance you get when squeezing the triggers, which goes a long way in making it feel like a real gun. The sound of the guns are also pretty good. I mean, it's not Call of Duty level amazing, but it's good enough to keep you immersed. And as I mentioned earlier, guns aren't the only thing that you can use. There's a pretty light magical element to the whole thing. And by that I mean that you only have a couple of magic wands that complement your guns. For example, there's one that shoots fireballs that chases after enemies, almost like a homing attack. There's another one that shoots balls that explode. And then there's the other one that summons a force field that makes bullets stronger when you shoot through it. Definitely one of the cooler spells that you can use. But that's it. It's just those three. That's literally all of them. It's unfortunate to see such a tiny amount of magic spells available, and I would have loved to see this expanded upon a bit more. Who knows, maybe even have an entire class dedicated to magic would be a fun thing to play around with, but hey, I digress. When playing most roguelikes, you'll find yourself going through randomly generated levels, and the Light Brigade is no exception. There are some design choices that stay consistent from one world to the other. If you go to, say, the sewers, you know you're gonna find a certain kind of platform. If you're in the abandoned ruins, you're gonna see a certain kind of structure. That kind of stuff. There are some things that stay the same, but generally the layouts are very different from one another. And they're even different when you increase difficulty levels as well. And there are also enemies that only appear in specific worlds, but generally there hasn't been a single level that I've seen twice, which adds to the experience by always keeping you on your toes since you can't truly memorize any layouts. Only know the basic aspects that you're going to find in certain worlds. And so within these levels you can find treasure chests and boxes that will provide you with money, health packs, ammo, and even attachments for your gun that make it stronger, but those are pretty rare to find. There's also card upgrades that give you benefits, like paralyzing your enemies, hypnotizing them, or boosting your attack power in some way. They are cool, but they can also leave you pretty overpowered. Although that can also be fun in its own way. Sometimes it's cool to just mow down a bunch of enemies because you're so powered up. But if you are looking for a challenge, then maybe don't grab these cards, as it is optional to just walk away and not pick them up at all. Of course, in my experience, I always grab them because they are very useful. One final thing that you can collect is souls. So yeah, for anybody that wants to make any Dark Souls jokes, you can definitely do them here, because when you kill an enemy, you can get their souls. And of course, if you're playing on higher difficulties, you get more souls than you would on easier difficulties. And so these souls can be deposited in a shrine so you can level up your class. And that's pretty much the only reason you would ever want to collect them. And of course, this is a roguelike, so if you die, you lose everything, including your souls, and then you'll have to start all over again. But you don't have to start over from only one death. You do have a limited amount of lives. If you can go back to where your body is, and then pick up your souls back and then survive the level that you died on, then you are allowed to just keep on going. And there's even upgrades that you can get later on where you can give yourself even more lives. So yeah, not as punishing or as unforgiving as other games, but you do have to beat all of the enemies all over again if you die and have to restart a level. So all of the enemies respawn, so you just have to be careful for that. So yeah, when you take all of these elements together, it creates a pretty addicting gameplay loop and keeps you playing for a while, which is possible thanks to the PSVR 2 headset's comfortable build. I have this game on Quest 2 as well, and I definitely had to take breaks because I didn't feel as comfortable playing long sessions in comparison to PlayStation VR 2. In addition to that, loading times are longer on Quest, and the draw distance is very small compared to the power of a PlayStation 5. For example, in the first few levels where you're inside a foggy forest, the fog is so much worse on Quest than it is on PSVR 2. On PlayStation 5, I can see the enemies from super far away, and then on Quest 2, I would be lucky to see anything that is directly in front of me. And that's why those levels are a lot more challenging, because the enemies can just surprise you way easier, because you can barely see them unless they're like right there in front of you. And as much as I really love this game, it doesn't come without its issues. When I stopped to think about criticisms, I was surprised at how many I could think of, despite me really loving this game. Regardless of that, I think it's important to point them all out if we want games like these to improve, so here we are, and here we go. Just like a ton of other VR games lately, it's a little bit too short. Now, I wasn't expecting a full 100-hour epic, but still, an entire playthrough is a small handful of worlds with 2 levels each. After finishing 2 worlds, you get a boss battle, of which there are only 2, and then the final boss at the end. All of which are incredibly easy. with the final boss in particular being especially disappointing, even on higher difficulties. Having the levels be randomly generated definitely helps, but I can't help but feel that there could have been more to this game, which leads me to the next criticism, which is the enemies. Another very common thing I've been noticing in a lot of these VR roguelikes is the lack of enemy variety. You will be fighting the same handful of enemies over and over, with very occasional exceptions where the RNG hates you and pulls out some bigger enemy out of its butt for no reason. But generally, it'll just be guy with gun, or guy with grenade, or guy with slightly different gun. Is just like that. And as I mentioned before, there are other more distinct enemies that appear, like there are rats in the sewers, and then in some more wintry kind of levels, you have a guy that can throw a bird at you that flies towards you and tries to kill you. But those are either locked within those specific worlds, or they're just randomly appearing whenever they want. For example, there are these big, scary Slender Man-looking dudes that just randomly appear wherever they want. It's not the worst thing in the world, but sometimes you fight so many dudes with guns to the point that the game leaves you wanting just a little bit more. And yeah, in the later stages of the game, you have these upgraded guys that have armor and shields and stuff like that, but ultimately it's just guy with gun again, but slightly beefier and more bullet spongy. If there are any other criticisms I can give, it's that there's also these daily challenges you can do that I never found too interesting. They were really hard and it didn't seem like I was getting anything unique out of them anyway, so I just stopped doing them. The music is also nothing to write home about and leaves a lot to be desired. Granted, you'll be so absorbed into the combat that you'll barely notice it anyway, but when you do, it's not that great, and it doesn't even fit the atmosphere all that well either. And as I mentioned before, the story is just kind of whatever. It's not a huge focus here. It's pretty basic and not really worth thinking about too deeply. From my perspective, it merely stood as window dressing that gave me an excuse to shoot man with gun cloned a million times. In conclusion, all of those criticisms, I think, pale in comparison to all the fun I was having with the Light Brigade. I haven't had so much fun with a VR game in a long time. And I'm really glad I got the PSVR 2 version specifically because of all the features the headset has that adds more to the experience. If you're looking for a good, immersive, and intense VR game that will give you a bunch of hours of playtime without breaking the bank, then I highly recommend this one. It's definitely worth your time.